Hello, it's Echo. Welcome to this glorious channel of mine. Look at this, we're actually doing an art video. Isn't that fun? So, when I was getting my bachelor's degree in graphic design, one of the things that we learned how to do was bookbinding, meaning that I know how to make my own sketchbooks. It's probably one of my favorite skills that I got out of my degree. Despite that, I buy sketchbooks all the time and then don't fill them. So today I figured I would show you how to turn this $1 sketchbook from the dollar store into this, an 80-page hardcover cute little sketchbook. I'm very happy with this one. So one of the downsides to these incredibly cheap sketch pads is that the paper is very, very thin. It's practically printer paper. It's not very high quality. Now, if you're gonna try and follow along at home, when you go to get your $1 sketch pad from the dollar store, you're also gonna need like 2 other things. The whole thing is not $1. I lied! Welcome to YouTube. On top of your $1 sketch pad, you're also gonna need a hard canvas. Make sure to get one with a cardboard backing and not a wooden frame, so they'll be flat like this, because this is what you're going to use to make the hard cover. You're also going to need glue for the cover and spine. You can use something like Elmer's glue, but it's slightly acidic, so it's not going to last long term. But it's a sketchbook, it's not supposed to be like super long term, and you can also remove the pages and rebind it in 50 years anyway, so it doesn't matter. You're just looking for some decent Mod Podge white glue. Also a brush if you don't have one. I like the little sponge ones because they're generally pretty cheap, and so you can just toss them when you're done. Beyond that, you're going to have to assemble your bookbinding kit. This usually consists of 2 boards, 2 to 3 C-clamps, a box cutter blade, and some old fabric. This can be a great way to recycle clothes that's too old to wear but that you really love. The fabric I used for this I actually got at a thrift store, and it's like a bunch of really pretty roses and stuff. It was just some really nice fabric that I bought for like 50 cents. Another really fun thing to do when you need small amounts of fabric like this is to go to Goodwill and thrift stores, and then you can find t-shirts or old clothes that have really cool patterns that you can use for bookbinding. And again, most of this stuff can be bought at the dollar store. The dollar store that I went to was out of C-clamps, so I ended up getting a different kind. They work all the same. The other thing I want to warn you about is that I spent like an entire semester making tons and tons of sketchbooks, so this is something that requires a little bit of skill, and the more that you make, the better they will turn out. So grab your 40-page simple sketchbook, and then the first thing we're going to do is free it from its spine, which means you're going to have to remove all of the paper. In order to do this, I took one of my metal straight edges and I just held it down and slowly cut off the spine. Learning how to work a box cutter is another thing that takes a lot of practice. So don't be surprised if you end up cutting at an angle or the ruler slips a little bit and your cuts don't look exactly perfectly straight. It takes time. The other thing you could do is remove the pages from the spine one at a time, but you do risk tearing them. I will leave that up to your discretion. So what you're going to want to do is take each page individually and fold them in half. What this is going to end up doing is it's going to make your spine a lot stronger because the glue is going to have a surface to adhere to, instead of just the edge of a paper. If you don't glue your spine properly, these pages could end up falling out and your entire book could fall apart. So when you're doing this, if you just do this with your hands, you will eventually end up rubbing off skin from your fingertips, and they actually make a tool called a bone folder that is specifically for this, because it used to be made from a chunk of bone to push down paper. But you can use pretty much anything. I'm using the edge of my box cutter, you can use an old gift card, as long as it's something that doesn't rub off on the paper. You don't want to color on the paper before you even draw. After that, take your stack of paper and then tap it down on a flat surface so that all of the pages align. It's really important that every fold is aligned at the spine, because if one of the pages is slightly away from the spine, when you put the glue, that page won't adhere and it'll just immediately fall out. So part of the reason that I ended up buying the canvas for the hardcover is because it's a lot heavier and sturdier than the cardboard backing that is generally on these notepads. If you wanted it to be a little bit more soft cover, you could just use the cardboard backing that's on the back of these sketch pads, but if that's what you're into, then whatever floats your boat. 2 things that you need in your bookbinding kit are 2 boards to hold all of your paper together while you're gluing the spine, but for this project I ended up just using 2 metal rulers, which work well enough, but really you'll want something with a much larger surface area. What you're going to want to do is sandwich your paper stack between your 2 boards and then tap them on a flat surface so that everything gets perfectly aligned. Once you do that, you're going to take your C-clamps or your clips and you're going to put them on the spine to hold everything together. This is kind of hard because you want to make sure that it doesn't shift or move, and personally I like to make sure that the paper is sticking out just a little bit so that you don't end up gluing your boards to your spine. If that happens, it's perfectly fine because you can can usually just flex it a little bit and trim it off. It won't really make a difference. So normally for a book this size, I would be using my boards and 2 C-clamps, but because I was using rulers that are slightly more flexible than the wooden boards that I'm used to, I ended up using 3 clips because otherwise the clips would pinch the edges of the spine and then the center would bubble up. When I was at the dollar store, I couldn't choose between the tacky glue and the craft glue. Really, either one works. This is just meant to be a sketchbook. It's not supposed to be super serious. Most likely, neither of these glues are pH neutral, which means they are not archival, so they're not gonna last hundreds of years. But I don't care! I just needed something to hold some paper together, so this works fine. You could use a paintbrush for this, but I prefer those little sponges on a stick, and because they're like 10 cents. This glue is water soluble, so you can save these sponges if you want, but they're like 10 cents, so I can spare it. For this part, you're gonna wanna do quite a few layers. This glue was really watery, so I ended up doing like 5 layers just to be safe. You can usually get away with about 3. When you're doing the first layer, make sure to really press the glue into the spine to make sure that it's getting between the folds of the paper. And then from there, you just gotta apply layer after layer until you really feel comfortable. Knowing how many layers of glue to put is another thing that just comes with practice, but in general, the more the better. This kind of glue tends to be really flexible, so it's unlikely that you can put too much of it, so it's better to shoot for too much rather than too little. Something that I like to do because I've spent years working with box cutters, but that is not completely necessary, is to trim your edges. When you fold all your paper together, you'll notice that the pages aren't perfectly flat because humans have a margin of error, so I will actually go through and cut off all of the edges of my book. That's an expert move that you might not want to try immediately. When you're cutting your cardboard canvas, there's 3 sections you need to cut. One for the front cover, one for the back cover, and one for the spine. And now for one of my favorite parts, putting on the fabric cover. Put your fabric face down and then lay your hardcover on top of it with the canvas side facing the fabric. And when you lay it out, you're going to want to make sure that you leave enough space between the cover and the spine for it to fold in. Otherwise, if you lay them edge to edge, it's not going to fold. The really nice thing about the canvas is that because it's already fabric, it's going to adhere a lot better. And then one at a time, you're going to take each hardcover section and you're going to cover it with a layer of glue. Make sure that everything is nice and even. And then from there, you're going to trim the fabric around your hardcover. Make sure that there's enough fabric to wrap over the edge and then trim the corners. From there, we coat the fabric in glue and wrap it over the corners. Be sure to press it around the corners as tightly as possible. I like to fold over my corners so that there's no exposed cardboard. I feel like it adds a nice finish. Once your fabric is folded over, let it sit to thoroughly dry. Because this is a water-soluble glue, it can very easily warp your paper, so you have to be careful. The next thing you're going to want to do is take some cardstock or extra paper or something and stick it between the first and last page of your text block. This is going to protect the main section of your sketchbook from the glue. Then you're going to want to place your paper stack inside of your hardcover and get it placed roughly where you want it. So the way that you're going to end up attaching your paper stack to your cover is via the first and last page. This right here is the first page of this text block, and it's just been glued to the front cover. Put a thorough layer of glue along the front hardcover, and then put it back together and apply pressure. This is what's going to adhere the paper stack to the cover. And you're going to want to do this on both the front and back pages, but not the spine. The spine should float freely. I used all of my clips to kind of help with the pressure while I waited for this to dry. And then once it's all thoroughly dried, you get to decorate. So since this fabric is covered in flowers, I decided to put a rose in the center. I'm not the best at drawing roses, so I did a couple pre-sketches just to try and figure out how I wanted to make it look. The rose ended up a little bit off center, which I'm not super happy about, but it's okay. And then I also added a bunch of these little edges too. And I think it came out okay. It's a nice little hardcover sketchbook. I'm finishing up the last of my June and July commissions, and then I will be opening up commission slots for August at some point here in the next week or so. I'll put links and info for all of that in the description. I also have a Patreon. Here's all my lovely patrons. I love them so much. You guys help me out so much. You have no idea. You get 1,000 awesome points for learning how to do all this fun time craft stuff. Anyway, it's getting hot in here, so I'm gonna go climb in my new refrigerator. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you later. Goodbye. Sweaty.